Navigating modal verbs. Mastering should and ought to. Hello language learners. In today's session, we are focusing on some tricky aspects of English grammar, modal verbs. Specifically, we'll zero in on two commonly misused modals, should and ought to. If you've ever found yourself unsure of how to use these in a sentence, worry not. We're going to address some common errors and teach you how to avoid them. So, let's dive in. Should and ought to are both used to talk about advice, obligations, and expectations. They can usually be used interchangeably. For example, you can say, "You should study for the test," or "You ought to study for the test." However, there are some key differences, especially in negative statements and questions. Let's break it down. One of the common mistakes learners make with should is using it in the past tense incorrectly. Remember, to talk about a past action that didn't happen but was advised, we use should have, followed by the past participle of the main verb. For example, instead of saying, "You should went to the doctor," the correct form is, "You should have gone to the doctor." Now, let's shift our focus to ought to. One typical mistake is forgetting to use to after ought. Remember, ought is always followed by to. Another mistake occurs when trying to form the negative. We don't say, "You oughtn't study." Instead, we say, "You ought not to study," or "You oughtn't to study." While should and ought to can often be used interchangeably, there are times when one is preferred over the other. Should is generally more common in everyday English, particularly in American English. Ought to, on the other hand, can sound more formal and is used less frequently. The best way to become comfortable with these modal verbs is to practice. Try creating your own sentences using should and ought to. Remember the common errors we discussed and do your best to avoid them. And that wraps up our discussion on the modal verbs, should and ought to. We've highlighted common errors and showed you how to avoid them. With a little practice, you'll master these in no time. As always, keep practicing and keep learning. You're doing great, and we'll see you in our next lesson. Happy learning!